thank you, everybody, for coming out to this meeting. For the Science and Politics Society, we are a group whose thesis is that science is the best way we can uncover facts about the world, and politics deals with this decision-making, often on a very large scale. So we think that you make the best decisions with the most facts. So today we have a very interesting speaker. It's Shaughnessy Naughton, who is the president and founder of an organization called 314action. And it is an organization dedicated to getting scientists, engineers more involved into politics and actually running them for office. From what I've read, you've ran hundreds, yes, or more than 1,000 maybe, candidates for office, and over the last few years they've raised millions of dollars, so it's very impressive. And we're very glad to have you.
Well, thank you, Will. I appreciate it.
So without further ado, let's give her a big hand.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Shaughnessy Naughton. I am the founder and president of 314action. 314, of course, being first three digits of pi, and a nod to what we are trying to do to encourage scientists, engineers, physicians to get involved in electoral politics. So this organization grew out of my own experience. I was a chemist by training. I worked in breast cancer research and drug discovery, and then actually got pulled into my family business and ran that for over a decade. And in 2014, I was very frustrated with what was going on in Congress. You know, at that point, Congress had voted 40-something times to repeal the Affordable Care Act rather than try to fix it. It was after the Sandy Hook shooting, and nothing was being done about gun violence. And certainly the action on climate change was completely stalled. And what I took home from that was that it was not a problem with science. The science was pretty clear on what we should do on those issues, but it was a problem with policy and policymakers, and that the only way we were going to change that was to change the policymakers. So I had this crazy idea that I would run for Congress, and it was about my great ideas, and I really did not know what I was getting myself into. Running for Congress is not dipping your toe in the water. It's jumping right in the deep end. And a big part of what you have to do when you run for an office like that is raise money. And that can be very frustrating because it's very hard to raise money. As graduate students, you feel probably that you don't have a lot of extra money to send to politicians. Well, I was 35 when I was running, and most of my friends were just starting their families and had kids. And you think you're poor now as a grad student, just wait till you have kids. But that's who you have to start with, is calling your friends and family and making the case that they should support your campaign for office. And so, coming not from a very wealthy family, that network was exhausted pretty quickly. And so we had to get very creative about how we were going to do this. And so we basically used the scientific method and started making lists of chemists and going state by state and making the case, cold calling these folks and making the case that even if they couldn't vote for me, that we would benefit by having more analytical thinkers in Congress. And started building this network of extending beyond chemists to physicists and mathematicians and scientists around the country, making the case that there is a real lack of diversity in Congress. One of the things I learned when I ran was that there were more talk radio show hosts in Congress at the time than scientists and engineers. And think about what that does to both the priorities as well as the process. Because what are scientists essentially? Problem solvers, collaborators. I think that's something we need a lot more of in Congress. So I did not win the election, but I went on to found 314action to work to recruit, train, and elect scientists and engineers, people with STEM backgrounds, to run for office, not just Congress, from the local level up through the federal level. And so that's what we've been working on the last couple of years. 2018 was our first full cycle as an organization. Part of what we do is we hold candidate trainings for scientists thinking about running for office. These are essentially 2-day boot camps that go over the A to Z of how to run for office, what's involved, how to put together a campaign plan and a finance plan. And one thing that we definitely focus on is communications, because how scientists communicate with each other is different than how you want to communicate with the general public. One of the things that we really emphasize is that that you want to be speaking to people in the language that they're going to understand what you were trying to communicate. And sometimes that can be a little difficult for scientists. So we helped elect 9 new scientists at the federal level, 1 to the US Senate, 8 to the US House. All of them as new members replaced folks that had some pretty bad stances on things like climate change and the importance of acting on it. We also helped elect 100 scientists or re-elect and elect scientists to state legislative offices. And we've grown our membership to over 1 million people. I think we're now at 1.3 million. And part of what we do is we can directly support candidates. We provide a lot of logistical support to help candidates set up their campaigns, hire staff, and then we can also spend on their behalf in uncoordinated campaigns, as well as help to raise them money. We can all bemoan the importance of money in elections, but there is a basic reality that if you don't have money to communicate, people don't know who you are and they're not going to vote for you. So one of the real strengths of our organization is that we are a grassroots network, and we are able to engage that network to help support our candidates all across the country. So what are we up against? We still have politicians that are denying the scientific consensus on things like climate change. And there's one reason why they can get away with that, and that's because we let them. If we start holding them accountable, running credible campaigns against them, and making it uncomfortable for them to continue to hold positions that really are indefensible, they'll stop doing it. It's really that simple, but too often they go unchallenged. So these are the freshmen that we helped elect to the US House and Senate. Jackie Rosen is a freshman US Senator from Nevada. She ran and won in 2018. In 2016, she was elected to the US House of Representatives from Nevada. So she was serving as a freshman member when she decided to run for Senate. She has a computer science background, and she was serving on the House Science Committee. What I think this story really highlights what we are trying to do once we get these folks elected. So serving on as a freshman in the minority in the US House of Representatives, the expectation would be that she would not be able to really accomplish anything legislatively, just because of how the House works, majority rules. But she focused on 2 pieces of legislation that she knew that she could get bipartisan support for. So one was a piece of legislation to encourage girls to go into coding, and the other was a piece of legislation focused on giving teachers better resources to teach math and science. And as a freshman member running for the US Senate in a very hotly contested race, the Republican members on the committee had said to the chairman, why are you going to let her put up that legislation? We're not going to not support that legislation, but you're going to give her a win when she's running for Senate. I mean, this is how politics works, that it's not always the best ideas that win. But the chairman of the committee was a big supporter of education. And so he did put the legislation forward. It passed the committee and then went on to pass the House. And it really shows that things can happen, and that these type of candidates and legislators are well positioned to actually get things done because they start with the premise of what we can agree on, and move from there, which isn't always the way politics works. I just want to highlight a couple things about these freshmen that I find really interesting. So Sean Caston is serving in a suburban district outside of Chicago. And he's a clean energy entrepreneur, chemical engineer. And he was in a hotly contested primary. And his main issue was climate change. It's his passion, it's what he spent his whole career doing. And his consultants told him that was a loser issue, you're not going to win your primary on climate change. But he did. And the incumbent Republican who had served in Congress for over a decade had voted against every climate initiative. Immediately following the Democratic primary, he joined the Climate Caucus in the US House. And if the story ended there, I would still tell you it because it does show that just by running a credible campaign and talking about issues that are important, you can make a difference. But then Sean went on to ultimately win in the general election. Lauren Underwood is also serving in a district in Illinois. And she is a former NIH researcher and nurse. And she co-founded the Black Maternal Health Caucus in the US House. And Black maternal health outcomes have been lower in this country, regardless of economic status or insurance or even prenatal care. But no one's ever focused on it before because probably no one's ever had Lauren's experience as a young African-American woman and a nurse. And she founded the caucus, and she said when she founded it, she would have been happy if it was just one other member. But I don't know what the final number is now, but the last time I talked to her about it, they had over 50 members, Republicans and Democrats, join on to her caucus, realizing that this is something as a country we need to make a priority. These are some of the incumbents that we helped elect. One that we were speaking about earlier, Jerry McNerney, is a PhD mathematician serving from California. Bill Foster is the only PhD physicist in Congress. And they both bring really interesting perspectives and experiences with them. Some of our state legislative victories. One here in New Jersey that we're especially proud of is Andrew Swicker. He is the head of the plasma physics lab at Princeton and is serving in the New Jersey State Assembly. In 2019, our scientists helped flip the House of Delegates in Virginia and now are working to really combat some of the most important issues of our time, from gun violence to action on climate and lowering barriers to quality education. You know, a lot of the focus as Americans is at the federal level because that is what we see on our news feeds every day. But a lot of really important and good work can happen at the state and local level, and we shouldn't ignore that. So in 2019, we held some focus groups and polling where we focused on battleground districts to see how these science candidates, what people think about them. And what came back as very interesting to me is that, not surprisingly, people like and trust scientists. They also like and trust them as political candidates, which that's not always the same thing. And part of why these folks with STEM backgrounds are resonating in these battleground districts is because the issues that people care the most about, healthcare, education, and the environment, are also the issues they associate with STEM candidates. And it doesn't really, you know, the field of STEM doesn't seem to matter a whole lot. It's the idea of scientists are looked at as honest brokers. And one thing that came out of the polling that I found very interesting as well is that people want their elected officials to base their policy decisions on facts and evidence, more than on what their constituents say that they want, which I found pretty interesting. So in 2020, you might have heard we have a presidential race. We also have every member of the U.S. House of Representatives is up for re-election, and about a third of the Senate. So these are some of the races that we have already endorsed in. John Hickenlooper is a geologist, former governor of Colorado, running to unseat Cory Gardner in the U.S. Senate. Dr. Al Gross is a surgeon, commercial fisherman, and also killed a bear with his bare hands, running for Senate in Alaska. He's an independent. It's an interesting, Alaska is an interesting place. Mark Kelly is a former NASA astronaut.
From New Jersey.
He's from New Jersey, that's right. He and his twin brother have both gone to space, but his brother, they're identical twins, but I guess they studied their DNA afterwards, and their DNA is now changed because of that. And then Dr. Barbara Bollier is also a physician running for U.S. Senate in Kansas. Again, I think having a healthcare background in a year where people are very concerned about what the future of their healthcare is going to look like is a real winner. Haral Tipernini and Pritesh Gandhi are running for Congress. They also are physicians. And then Nancy Goroff is the former chair of the chemistry department at Stony Brook. So she would be the first PhD chemist in Congress. And Adam Hattersley is an engineer, a Navy veteran, and we helped elect him to the Florida State House. He's now running for Congress there. So what's next? We're still recruiting for 2020. What I remind people of is that we have 500,000 elected positions in this country. Not all of them require the level of commitment or finances that running for a federal office does. We're continuing to hold trainings. In 2018, the Washington Post declared it the year of scientists running for Congress, and we hope to make it every year. So I'm appreciative that you're here tonight and thinking about getting involved. We have lots of ways to do that. There are more science graduate students thinking about that intersection of policy and politics and science, and I think that's very, very encouraging because traditionally the rate of voting among science majors is towards the bottom. So I would ask you all to make sure you commit to vote, but also talk to your colleagues and friends. And sometimes the barrier to voting is so simple, but people just don't know what to do and don't even know who to ask. So I really encourage you to talk to your colleagues. That's how you can keep up with us. We also have a podcast. We'll be starting our second season this fall. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions that you have.
What is the balance of Democrats, Republicans, I guess you have an independent there, that you have, or is it set up by design to be more one way? Because people that I recognize are, I think, all Democrats.
All Democrats. Yeah, so we leave the door open, but there is a reality that there is not much appetite in the Republican Party for an agenda that is based in reality when it comes to climate change. It's a very sad statement. So NBC did a show on us, some of our candidates over the summer. And the reporter kept asking that, why haven't you endorsed any Republicans? And I said, okay, go talk to one.
We have one.
Yeah.
Great.
And so they found a PhD Republican freshman from Indiana, scientist, and said to him, "What do you think about this group? 314 Action, they work to elect scientists. I think it's fantastic. I'm on the science committee. We absolutely need more scientists in Congress." Gives us this ringing endorsement. And she says, but their criteria is that you have to accept the scientific consensus on climate change. And he says, well, the climate's always been changing. We don't really know if this is human caused. And that's the problem. It's a political problem. It is not a problem with the.
So are there a set of issues that is it only?
So our
climate change?
criteria is at the federal level, we work pretty closely with the candidates, so we do get an idea of where they are. But our criteria at the federal level is a STEM background with a pro-science agenda. We ask that through a climate change question. And some of the down ballot races, we do probe a little further because, especially on school board races, evolution is sometimes still being debated and things like that. So we do ask some more questions. In 2017, we heard from about 7,000 scientists that were interested in running, and maybe 5 were Republican. Yes?
Question about what's the agenda for the climate policy? What do you want to implement to help?
So we don't put out a platform that they have to. I have my own personal feeling on what I think would be the best way forward, but we don't dictate an actual platform. It's a huge country, and we think it's best that the individual candidates and members can map their own course as to what they do, and our expectation is that they're going to base that on the facts and evidence, and we think that will create better policy. Did you have a follow-up, or no?
No.
Yes.
So to clarify, I guess what we talked about for the first question, the only points of unity are specifically related to the pro-science agenda that you mentioned, and it's a matter of either you endorse them if they pass the test or they don't.
Mm-hmm. So specifically, what exactly do you mean by that?
Oh,
Do we
well,
have
pass the
other-
test, I mean, like, they answered, I guess, correctly, questions about climate change and evolution and any other issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so we've had it come up on vaccines being an issue, right? Where we actually had 2 scientists in the same race, and one was saying the other was, anti-vaccine. So we did have to investigate it. It turned out it was not true. So I would say there are, the idea is that these types of candidates and legislators are going to base their policies on facts and evidence, but we don't set out a platform for every single issue. Yes.
Some of these people who you were trying to help, you helped to be elected, how many of them were trained in any other major other than natural sciences, economics or politics or?
So we focus on people with STEM backgrounds, so science, technology, engineering, math, and it's not to say that social scientists don't bring something valuable to the process. It's just that what we see is that there's a real underrepresentation of people with STEM backgrounds. So we specifically try to help them get elected. So we include with that healthcare, computer science. We take a pretty broad definition, but we do keep it focused around the STEM fields.
No, I mean among the STEM people, do they have any other background? I mean, any?
Oh, sure.
Anything.
Sure. Yes.
I mean, if you're a scientist and you want to be a politician, I mean, are they expected to have any?
Yes, they usually are not Nancy Goroff, who I highlighted, is probably the only, or one of the only academics that we have coming straight out of academia. But most of them have started businesses, even gone on, are physicians who are generally trusted people in the community, nurses, engineers. Many even go on to get law degrees, even though they come from a STEM background. So they have pretty diverse backgrounds, but it is hard to go from academia straight into a run for federal office. Usually there needs to be, usually it's helpful to have had experience outside of academia.
Okay, so if I have a science degree, what are the process? What's the process? What are all the steps to go running for Congress? What do you usually do with these candidates that gets them elected?
Sure. So there's, so one is we educate them on the process of what is actually involved in running for Congress. That is a full-time commitment. That means you have to be prepared for that financially as well as in your career that you can do that. Then we can help with media training, with communications to help them learn to better communicate with the general public. We help them hire their staff, put together campaign plans, finance plans, help to introduce them to other organizations and members of Congress who might support them. And then we continue to work with their campaigns along the way to provide advice, strategy, really act as a support network that they can rely on to get good advice that's that's independent, but also not beholden to any other special interests other than them. Yes?
I like how you mentioned communication and how you're helping scientists communicate, because I've noticed that a lot of STEM people have a hard time talking to big audiences and getting their ideas across to general audiences. My question is, do you see, after working with so many hundreds and thousands of people, a common weakness that STEM people have when they're trying to run for something or get into politics?
Well, I think one of the challenges for scientists is they can often be very literal, right? And I remember when I was running, you pretty much sit in a windowless room with the headset on and make phone calls all day. And I had a whole stack in front of me, and I knew I had to make 200 calls that day. And I was talking to this researcher in California, professor, and he says, "So how much money do you have to raise to run for Congress?" After I made my introductions and made my case, and I'm thinking, well, if I tell him $2 million, it's, that's just too much. It's not, it's going to hang up. So I said, well, you know how it is. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And he shrieks into the phone, "What are you doing eating an endangered species?" And I think that kind of tells a little bit of, it's a good anecdote as to, the biggest challenge, I think, for scientists. The other thing is if you ever listen to politicians, they are 100% sure of everything that comes out of their mouth. Whereas scientists always say, we have some doubt. And the way scientists talk about doubt and uncertainty is different than how the general public understands it. So I think that those two are, the biggest challenges that we have to try to drill out is that when you're talking about uncertainty with your colleagues, that means one thing. But when you're talking about uncertainty to a general public, it's not conveyed the same way.
It's almost like a different language.
It is.
That you have to learn.
It is. I mean, think about, how the word theory is used among scientists versus the general public, or hypothesis, or, just those two basic words. So it's it's language, it's communication, and it's also, I think part of the hesitation among scientists is that they often feel that they have to tell you, you have to lay out everything, otherwise you can't say anything, right? If you're not a complete expert on it, then you shouldn't weigh in. And that's not how you get your education, right? You don't take quantum mechanics in your first year of physics. You learn things incrementally. And it's not that your freshman physics teacher is lying to you. They're just making it so you can learn. And you have to think about that in a similar context to when we're communicating with people who aren't scientists.
And are the majority of them picking up, like they're understanding if you tell them, hey, you have to communicate a certain way?
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting. We do a survey at the end of each training. We usually have about 30, 35 people. And we ask, what did you learn? What did you like? And there's always at least one or two people that say, I learned I am never going to run for public office. And that's okay. It's not for everybody, but you can all be involved in some way. Yes?
Among those who was elected, are they still active in science? I mean, are they doing research? Or is it possible to balance?
No, not at the federal level. At state and local levels, yes. So Andrew Zwicker still runs the plasma physics lab. The New Jersey Assembly, I'm pretty sure, is part-time. So it really depends. Most school boards are meant to be served on part-time. So that's something that you can completely do without interfering with your career path and have a tremendous impact on your community. And it's not just STEM issues. It's health class. It's budget priorities. There's a lot that you can do without having to completely put your career on hold.
I was,
Let's get her.
On the topic of similarity, this is purely out of curiosity. Have you noticed any similarities among science running for office outside of science policy?
What I would say, the similarities are, I'm just going to look this slide here, is that they do often end up naturally caucusing together. And I don't think it has, I think it has more, I talked about the priorities in the process. I think both of those kind of align among the folks. And it's why they end up caucusing together. They all come from districts where they have to persuade voters. They're not solid blue districts. Actually, all these folks unseated or replaced Republicans in Congress. So they are people that have to compromise and understand the importance of that in legislation. Yep.
yeah, I was just thinking, you were shown that most of the people in Congress are lawyers. Maybe that's because they're very good at communicating. That's what they do in their job every day. So they're so used to that, it just comes naturally to them. And they understand how to convince people of a certain thing, how to convince people to vote for them.
Yep.
So if someone spends every day analyzing data, it just doesn't come naturally to them in the same way.
And the thing is that you don't convince voters with facts and figures. As sad as that can seem, that's not how you convince people. It's emotionally, it's connecting with them. Do they feel that you're listening to them and understanding them and caring about them? It's not enough for just that, but that's an important part of it. And so it is a different skill set, but the thing is as scientists, you've already accomplished a lot just by getting your undergraduate degrees, and I think most of you are graduate students. Yeah. That's if you can do that, you can learn to run for office. And especially at the non-federal level, the types of skills are different. I mean, if you think about being on city council and the city planning that goes on to that, probably a lot of the other people on the council don't want to have to look at the reports of the sewer systems or thinking about infrastructure planning the way that you would be comfortable tackling those type of challenges. You know, one story I'd like to highlight as well is a legislator that we helped to elect, a scientist. You know, he tells the story of his first meeting with his new colleagues once he got elected. And they were discussing raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. You know, he's on board, but he raises his hand and he says, "How'd you come up with $15 an hour?" And it was pretty much blank faces. And you know, he's like, "Well, how did you decide how to get to $15 an hour? You know, so we're raising it the right amount and making sure, you know, it's working right." He said, "Well, we're in New Jersey. You know, we have the world's expert on minimum wage is at Princeton University. Did anybody read the paper he just put out on raising the minimum wage?" And you know, and I think those are exactly the type of questions that I would expect scientists to ask. It's not just to assume, yeah, okay, that sounds great, 15, but where did it come from? You know, and I think we would get better policy, better approach to doing things if more people ask those types of questions. Yes?
Seems like more and more people are starting to accept the science of climate change.
Yes.
A whole bunch of politicians are also in the opposite direction. Do you think we're going to start seeing like a rebound of more politicians starting to accept science now if more voters support the science?
Yes. Yeah. Politicians are in the business of self-preservation. So when when their constituents are demanding action on things, they generally respond. You know, and it's not just on the science on climate. Think about the science on gun violence, right? Or the fact that research wasn't even allowed to really be collected until last year, for the last 25 years. There's a number that's often floated about that 90% of Americans support greater restrictions on gun purchases. You know, they want universal background checks. 90%. So that sounds great. 90%. Why doesn't it get done? Because people don't vote on it, and they don't let their legislators know that they are voting on this issue or against. And it's the same thing, you know, with climate or whatever the issue might be, that it's important to let them know. Even the most anti-science politician knows how to count, and they count the calls that come into their office, and that's incredibly important. Whether you're agreeing with them on something or disagreeing with them, or you want them to do something about something that they don't isn't even on their radar. It's very important, and it's very easy. You know, especially the more local the office, the more accessible they generally are. That you can make relationships with either the legislator themselves or their staff to build that trust. Let them know, you know, I live in your district. I know a lot about this issue that's going on in the district. I think you should be doing this. You know, I would like to work with you on this. That really does work.
So you started your first run in 2014?
Yes.
And you just came in from a chemistry background.
No, I have also worked in business for, yeah.
So for the last 6 years, what's like the biggest thing that's hit you about politics that you learned? Because before that, you weren't involved.
I was not involved. Oh, that's a good question. Wow. So I really did not know how things worked on the campaign side or really even on the legislating side. I mean, I had volunteered knocking on doors and making phone calls, but I hadn't really done a whole lot beyond that. I think one of the biggest things I learned was that these, I mean, it sounds kind of basic, these are regular people too, and generally are curious. They do want to do the right thing, you know, even if we may not agree on what that is. But that you can reach out to them and establish those relationships and trust so that when needed, you can help to better influence policy. I don't think I appreciated how accessible many of them are. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
What were like the bad aspects of the church political system that you found out while running?
How much time do you have? I mean, you know, it is very hard to break into politics when you don't come from a traditional political background. When you don't have those networks of colleagues that are used to writing checks and even have the type of career system that allows you to cycle in and out the way lawyers do. And so that is why I founded this organization, is to, you know, help plant the seed and grow the awareness among scientists that they can do this, and that will show them how when we have this network of folks that will help support them. No? No. Okay.
All right, so
Great.
with that, let's give Shaughnessy another round of applause. First of all, really appreciate you coming out and talking to us. I think you're an example of someone that really not just talks the talk, I mean, you walk the walk. Look at how many people you've gotten that are scientists running and elected. So, very impressive.
Thank you.
And I want to give you a nice
Oh,
little
thank
thing
you.
there. And
Very nice.
yeah.
Yeah.